I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and the traditional owners of the land across the continent and surrounding islands, and express my absolute solidarity with their struggle against colonialism here. I hope I can be coherent today because I'm pretty jet lagged, but let's see. What we're seeing in Gaza at the moment and other parts of Palestine cannot be described as anything but a project of erasure, of deliberate and systematic genocide. We know this because the Israeli ministers have expressed it pretty clearly, pretty blatantly, in different ways, and not just now. I mean, you know, they're talking about, for example, moving Palestinians from the north of Gaza to the south of Gaza and then eventually to the Sinai Desert, which is, you know, nothing short of ethnic cleansing. But there's been talk about this in the Israeli Knesset for, you know, decades. So this idea isn't new, and what we're seeing isn't new. But what is new, I guess, in many ways for us is just how much support this genocide has had from the Western political establishment and the media establishment in the West. They're basically outright condemning the resistance of the occupied and applauding the genocide committed by the occupier. They talk about Israel's right to defend itself. Israel is the occupier. It doesn't have the right to defend itself against the population that it occupies. Not with regard to international law, not with regard to any kind of moral understanding. I mean, it's an accepted, you know, it's accepted that the occupied have the right to resist. It's occupation that's illegal. But this green light, I guess, I mean, for many of us Palestinians, I've just arrived back from Lebanon, where I was, you know, involved in lots of things there with the Palestinian community, refugee community there, and you know, people are talking about that the world will never be the same for us again after this. This is not just an attack on Gaza, because that's happened over and over again. But the lines that have been crossed, I guess, are kind of more extreme and makes it more apparent. Not to us. I mean, this has to be seen as part of the ongoing Nakba. We're familiar with this as Palestinians. You know, so the Nakba has been going on for 75 years, and these kinds of what's going on in Gaza right now cannot be seen as an isolated incident, but rather as part of the kind of totality of Israeli occupation of our lands. And every single policy, every single Israeli action is part of that totality. And the aim of that is to remove as many Palestinians off the land as possible and to control as much land as possible with as little Palestinians on the land as possible. It's obviously in the West Bank for the last number of years, we've seen, you know, people being ripped out of their homes, land being confiscated, you know, and settlements built on those lands. So this is all part of the kind of same tapestry of colonization of our lands. Despite the media blackouts and you know, not kind of really showing, as Amy talked about as well, like, you know, the media, the protests have been huge kind of internationally. They're not getting that kind of media attention, if you like, or media exposure. Despite that, I mean, there is, the tide is turning. I mean, although the political elite and the media elite are kind of with Israel and have made that very clear, you know, the streets, the people are, you know, there's a growing kind of momentum. And I say this to say that, you know, I've spoken to people in Gaza and they have expressed in so many ways how important it is to keep this momentum going. So even after the media storm is over, it's so important to keep protesting, to keep talking about Palestine in whatever way that you can, that you're able to. And, you know, and there's also, there's not just the media blackout, there's, you know, countries like France and Germany are sort of introducing legislation that criminalizes support for Palestine. So the genocide is happening in the most kind of brutal and violent kind of manifestation on the ground in Palestine, but even globally, Palestinian people and Palestinian voices and pro-Palestinian voices of our allies are being silenced, more and more. We're seeing more and more of that. And the repression is going to get worse. So I hope that you can kind of fight through that repression that we're kind of going to see even more and more, because support for Palestine, I've just come back, I've mentioned this from Lebanon, and it's such a different environment. I read this poem once many years ago that Palestine doesn't need explanation, but Palestine does. And I've been experiencing that already in the couple of days that I've been back. But I want to talk a little bit about. So I was in Lebanon recently to work on a film. I've been working on a film project about my village. I come from Safsaf, which is in the Safad region of the Upper Galilee, so very close to the border of Lebanon, and. So I interviewed my elders, who are all mostly close to, those who are old enough to remember, are close to 90 years old. So I recorded their interviews, their oral history testimonies of what happened, of what our village was like before colonization, and what happened, how come my village community live in refugee camps in Lebanon. I wanted to understand that from them. So while we were editing these stories, the backdrop was the attacks on Gaza, and accusations of rape, and we were editing stories of actual rape that occurred in my village, and the massacre of over 120 boys and men. So half of my, most of my father's relatives, male relatives, were killed in that massacre. And this happened 75 years ago. So my grandfather, there was a resistance front in our village, and they were able to stop the invasion, prevent an invasion twice before they actually broke the resistance front. They came with warplanes, basically, that were given to them by the British, and a convoy of military vehicles also given to them by the British. And my folk were village folk, peasant farmers, and so they basically put down their shovels because they'd heard about other villages attack and massacre in other villages. They bought arms. Most of them were faulty. They didn't know about guns. They didn't know about fighting. They knew about farming, but they put down their shovels. They picked up a rifle, including my grandfather, and they protected the village as much as they could. We're very proud of our resistance, although it broke, and we were forced to Lebanon. And we're very proud of our resistance today. We're not going to sit down, and we're not going to be quiet wherever we are in the world, and we're going to resist this repression, because that's what this project is all about. It's about silencing our voices, killing our people. I mean, we could absolutely die of grief if we allowed ourselves to. But now is not the time for despair, I say through tears. It's time to fight. So we hope that you join us in our fight for freedom.